Okay, thanks all for joining us. What we're having right now is our second webinar in a series. Last Tuesday, we went through a broad swipe of different issues going on in the last week and a half or so. What we're going to focus in on today is more the role of the representatives. So when I use the word representatives, I'm talking about local executive, maybe national officers, or health and safety committee members or health and safety representatives, depending on the size of the workplace. So my goal today is to have a little bit shorter discussion today, not so broad, a little more focused in on some of the questions that have been coming forward from representatives that I think will be important to hash out a little bit and ensure that everybody has a good awareness. We will again have opportunity for questions. So we'll do if you were on the call last week, we're going to do questions a little bit differently because we have a more manageable group, like not the 840 or whatever we had last time. What we will do is, once I've gone through my presentation, we've got some staff on the call that will monitor the questions as they come in. And then what we'll do is, if it's a question that makes sense for us to answer and is on topic, that what we'll do is we'll open up your microphone and then let you know we're opening up your microphone so that you can ask your question yourself, so you can be clear about what your question is, and Marianne or myself or whoever's answering the question has a full understanding of what you're asking and why you're asking, kind of thing. So it'll be a little more interactive than we had last time. So on our call today, we have our Regional Executive Vice President for the PSAC in the Prairie region, Marianne Ladoon. We have Alana Mackinson, who is our Political Communications Officer in the PSAC for the Prairies. We have Lindsay Sparks, who's a regional representative currently working out of the Winnipeg Regional Office still, but will be moving to the Calgary Regional Office whenever this settles. And as well, for this session, we have Caroline Klug, who's the Regional Education Officer for the PSAC in the Prairies. And so you don't get tired of listening to me talk for an hour again, or hour and a half. She'll be presenting a section on how do we engage our members when we aren't meeting face to face. So we'll have a bit of discussion that Caroline will lead around how to connect with members, you know, when people are teleworking and there's priorities, those kinds of things. We will do, so part of our agenda we'll review the key sections of the Canada Labour Code and reference to the provincial language, do a very brief overview. I would imagine the majority of people that are on this call were on the call last week, but I think it's worth noting a few key sections so that when we talk about the responsibilities of the local executive or the Health and Safety Committee, Health and Safety Representative, we've got a good understanding going forward. We'll review the role of the committee specifically, or the health and safety representatives in addressing workplace issues. So in this webinar tonight, we'll look more specifically at the role of the committee members, what they can be doing, what they should be doing in resolving workplace issues around the pandemic. We'll look a little bit closer in the definition of critical versus essential worker. We'll break down those two definitions a little bit, provide a little more clarity on what the difference is and why they're different and how they're different and how that plays into the issue in pandemic and working remotely, those kinds of things. And we'll also talk about reaching out to members and staying connected, you know, in these challenging times. You know, we're used to seeing people face to face. We're used to relying just on email. I think this is an opportunity to explore other avenues of connecting with members. So some of the key sections of the Canada Labour Code, as we'll review, I stole a couple slides from the last week, so you're going to see these again. Just as a reminder, most provincial legislations will have similar wording. If you need the specific references, contact your local, your PSAC regional office, or myself, and we can attach, you know, the corresponding language for the provincial legislations. One of the questions I got asked in the last webinar was why I wasn't covering off Alberta jurisdiction. So the PSAC doesn't have members that fall under provincial jurisdiction, But if you have family members or loved ones that fall under the provincial legislation and you wanted to know how it applied to them, the same sort of concepts we're applying to Manitoba and Saskatchewan will also be applicable to Alberta. Alberta has very similar wording, sometimes stronger, sometimes less strong wording around some of the health and safety obligations. So when we're talking about the Canada Labour Code, or we're talking about the provincial legislations, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, you can also infer that we'll be talking about that there's a corresponding language somewhere, most likely around the Alberta provincial language as well. But again, we're not going to go over that in great detail, but it is there for those that had the question. Sections we will look at, we'll be reviewing processes, required training, protective equipment, and other employer responsibilities. I'm going to mention the right to refuse. I'm not going to go into the right to refuse in great detail like we did last webinar for a couple of different reasons. First one is we've already gone over that process. Secondly, I don't think it's the issue that it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago kind of thing. If there's a dangerous situation in the workplace, chances are if your only option was the right to refuse, we would have been talking about that a week ago, week and a half ago, those kinds of things. I think the only time we might run into a situation where there's a right to refuse, more often than not, is around if somebody's got a compromised immune system where they need special consideration and the employer's not taking that into consideration. I think that might be an opportunity more to explore the opportunity of right to refuse. I'm also still mentioning the right to refuse because we're going to build that into the concept of the committee's or the representative's responsibility to help address some of those situations. And again, hopefully we've dealt with a number of issues before they ever get to this point. And hopefully there's no situations going on in the workplace that haven't been resolved. And hopefully this isn't the issue that it was, like I said, a week or two ago. There's the whole concept of preventative measures, where the first thing you want to look at is eliminating the hazards altogether. That's the first thing that the local executive should be looking at, first thing that Health and Safety Committee or representative should be looking at, eliminating those hazards. Either eliminating the virus altogether, that's not likely for an employer to do, but eliminating the people from the hazard by removing them from the workplace, I think that would be the next reasonable step to take in order for that first level to be accomplished. If you can't do that, then you minimize the reduction of hazards. They have to go into work to do their work. Maybe they only do it 1 or 2 or 3 times a week as opposed to the full 5 times a week. And then the last resort should be the personal protective equipment and clothing, devices, materials, those kinds of things. Depending on the kind of work that you do, that would determine what sort of personal protective equipment would be needed. The most obvious example I can think of right now is border services. There's a lot of issues around, especially with border services, around not knowing who is coming to your window or when you're receiving people and documenting their entry into the country. There's also the increased issues with traveling, where they've been, what they've been exposed to, all those kinds of things that you don't know until you have the chance to ask those questions, and hopefully you're getting the truth when you do ask those questions. And then balancing that out with all the other health and safety measures that are taken in place already. An example of that would be, healthcare workers will wear a gown. Doesn't make sense for a border services officer to wear a gown and then not have access to all those other tools that they have for their health and safety. So it's a real balancing act, and border services is a particularly difficult area to address because they are essential. The work they're doing is critical, but then there is also the health and safety of those workers that we need to take into consideration and do everything reasonably practicable to protect the health and safety of those workers. There's this blanket statement that every employer shall ensure that the health and safety at work of every person employed by the employer is protected. And that's your umbrella language that we hang our hat on, and nothing takes away from that. Specific employer responsibilities, especially around the pandemic that we're talking about, provide prescribed sanitary personal facilities. Hopefully, my understanding talking to staff and members that have come forward with concerns last week in follow-ups that I've had. A lot of workers and a lot of members are reporting a lot of improvements around sanitation, protective equipment being provided, sanitizer, hand washing, all those sorts of things have really improved lately. So I think the vast majority of workplaces have really addressed some of these concerns that we'll be going through. And as Marianne can attest, some of our most difficult employers to deal with in general have even started coming around and being protective of their workers' health and safety and taking proactive measures to protect their health and safety. So it's really positive to see a lot of workplaces making leaps and bounds to protect the health and safety of their workers that going back a week or two, I did not feel comfortable with. Providing every person granted access to the workplace by the employer with prescribed safety materials, equipment, devices, and clothing. A lot of workplaces have closed off access to workplaces from the public. That's a good example of, instead of addressing this concern, just eliminating that altogether. Ensures that levels of ventilation, humidity, sound, and vibration. Key one here is ventilation. If the ventilation in the building has been a concern that the committee, the Health and Safety Committee has been looking at prior to, might be a good idea to revisit when we talk about committee meetings. And we'll be going through that in a little more detail. Provide in this prescribed manner each employee with the information, instruction, training, and supervision necessary to ensure their health and safety at work. Again, this is another section that I've heard a lot of improvement from employers on this, where employers were apprehensive, not providing clear direction. What I'm hearing back from workers and employees is that the employer has been, providing training and instruction on protecting themselves and using PPE if that's required, those kinds of things. Ensure that each employee is made aware of every known or foreseeable health and safety hazard in the area where the employee works. That's an obvious one, dealing with the pandemic. And employers have been taking a number of measures in a number of different workplaces to address that. Ensure that the activities of every person granted access to the workplace do not endanger the health and safety of employees. Another good example of just, if you're closing off the building, limiting access, that's a really good way of eliminating the hazard, so you don't have to deal with it, so you don't have to provide that PPE. If you've, stopped that from happening, then you don't have to worry about all those protections in place, which is really encouraging to see, and which is what we want to see workplaces do. Ensure that employees have supervisory or managerial responsibilities, are adequately trained in health and safety, and are informed of the responsibilities they have under this part where they act on behalf of the employer. One of the things I hope to have happen once the dust is settled on all of this is that we take the opportunity to reflect back on, as a workplace, what did we do well, what did we not do so well, and how can we improve and learn from this pandemic and apply it to future instances of health and safety. One of the key areas where I see that is in the managerial responsibilities. What we had been seeing, even going back a couple of weeks, is workplace managers were having a lot of difficulty understanding what the hazards were and how to react to them and how to protect them, those kinds of things. I think that there's the messaging coming down, right from the top, from the employers in a lot of cases, have started addressing some of those concerns. And hopefully we build off of that, learn from it, so the next time something like this happens, unfortunately, and likely it will, that we're better prepared and have the better training. That's one of the key aspects, especially when we talk about the Health and Safety Committee. We'll talk about training. That's an area that's been lacking for a long period of time in a number of workplaces. Some workplaces have been doing a really fabulous job around training committee members, others not so much. Specifically, the wording around the workplace committees and policy committees and workplace representatives. Just as a quick reference, difference between a workplace committee and a workplace representative is basically the size of the workplace. If the workplace isn't big enough for a committee, then you have a representative that has the exact same roles and responsibilities as a workplace committee does. They're responsible. The employer shall ensure that they develop, implement, and monitor in consultation with the policy committee, the workplace committee, or the health and safety representative, prescribe programs for the prevention of hazards in the workplace, appropriate to the size and nature of the hazards, and it also provides for the education of employees in health and safety matters. A couple of the key comments on this subject is the committee needs to be consulted on what's going on in the workplace and decisions being made in the workplace. My guess is with the emergent nature of what's going on around the pandemic, that hasn't been happening in a number of cases. But now that things have settled a little bit, it's time to establish the committee as the body that has the legal responsibility and the legal right to direct and provide information to the employer, make recommendations, be consulted, have those discussions, those kinds of things. Consult with the policy committee or workplace committee or health and safety representative, the plan of implementation of changes that might affect occupational health and safety, including work processes and procedures. So if a workplace has come up with a number of different ideas on what should be done in the workplace, hopefully the committee or the representative has been consulted on that. If they haven't been consulted, then it's an opportunity for that committee to connect and evaluate what's been going on in the workplace, see where there are improvements that can be made, or help with identifying the training that's needed that's outstanding. Or even on the information going out, being of assistance in making sure that information gets out to everybody that needs to get out to, those kinds of things. The employer should also consult or shall also consult with the workplace committee or health and safety representative the implementation of changes that might affect occupational health and safety, including work processes and procedures. So again, if there's work processes and procedures going on in the workplace, the committee or the health safety representative should have been consulted. If they aren't, then my recommendation is they should be consulted on the evaluation of those processes and procedures, and as well as any changes to those processes or procedures. Some of the tips for health and safety committees or representatives, one of the things I've been recommending since the very start of this pandemic is to call for an emergency meeting. Most committees have scheduled meetings 9 times a year, regularly scheduled, but there is also the opportunity in both the federal and provincial languages for the chairs to call for emergency meetings. So even with all the issues and the current trends and how they're constantly evolving and changing, there should be the opportunity for the committee to form an emergency meeting, get together, hopefully electronically, to discuss what's going on. So everybody's aware of the issues, what's being done to protect the health and safety of everybody in the workplace, and then be proactive if there's changes or things coming up in the future. That there's a process to evaluate what's working, what changes need to be taken into consideration, those kinds of things. They should be discussing the current measures being taken in the workplace. Oftentimes what I've heard in a number of workplace committees or with representatives is when you do get together for meetings, it's simply the employer reporting what they're doing, and that's the end of it. There's no consultation, there's no participation of the committee. What we want to do is really reinforce that the committee needs to be consulted and participating. There's an opportunity to provide input, to provide insight, especially if you're representing the employees, for example, that you're speaking on behalf of those employees. And if the committee notes anywhere there's measures that are inadequate, they have the ability to discuss and address those issues and come up with a plan for the workplace to implement those changes or those requirements to protect the health and safety of everybody in the workplace. There should also be a plan for other meetings to follow up on decisions and recommendations, as well as to stay on top of the latest information and trends. One of the things I wanted to do when I was planning this webinar a few days ago was to provide an update of where we're at with all the latest information that we have on the pandemic and the current situation. And I found by the next day it was outdated. So my suggestion would be that the committees and the representatives are meeting much more often to evaluate the constantly evolving information that we're getting around the pandemic and the recommendations put forward by the provinces and the health authorities. Also share information gathered at meetings in the workplace with the local executive and all members. So if there's an issue that you're discussing at a health and safety committee meeting, that you're making sure that you're sharing that information with everybody in the workplace. Most importantly with the local executives, so that they can have that information and they can use their devices to share that information, as well as with all the members. One of the things I'd like to see is the committee have a face to themselves when they go forward in the workplace saying, hey, I'm Clint, I'm your health and safety committee member. If you've got a health and safety question, you can go talk to him in your local, those kinds of things. Really establish their role in addressing health and safety issues. Also remind the committee members and representatives that you were elected to your positions, maybe selected, maybe nominatold, maybe coerced into that position. But if you're the employee representative on that committee, you've been selected to represent the needs of the employee in that workplace. So you want to make sure that if you're hearing concerns from employees, that you're sharing those at the committee meetings. Another excellent example of why you want to have those meetings. So you've got a good understanding of what's going on in the workplace, what the challenges are, and what can be done to address them. The biggest one in my mind is the training. Well, at the end of my presentation here, we'll go through a couple different opportunities for training for committee members, for local executive, those kinds of things that'll really help understanding the pandemic and the current workplaces. But that's an area that I've found ever since I've been in this position, that the training for committee members on health and safety issues, their real roles and responsibilities as a committee member or representative has been lacking for the most part. And then when you start rolling in their role in investigating right to refuse situations, or the internal complaint resolution process, or identifying hazards and coming up with solutions to hazards, a good solid understanding of all those issues only supports the work that the committee is doing. And that's required. And it's required for the employer to make sure that the committee has that training. So we'll look at some options as we finish up our slide presentation tonight on some of the different training opportunities that are available electronically. There is the provincial equivalents that I've been talking about. The key sections are referencing the employer's responsibility and the role of the committee. Again, right to refuse dangerous work. I don't see an issue. I don't really want to go through the step-by-step process again. If you do have questions, there's excellent resources available explaining and detailing the right to refuse. Why I'm bringing it up here is a couple different reasons. Is there still may be members that are coming forward saying, I want to refuse my right to refuse dangerous work. Absolutely, they have the ability to do that. My hope would be that that could be resolved before that process gets to that point, and often that process can be avoided with the consultation of the local, with the consultation of the committee, the component. So the employee wishing to exercise the right to refuse reports that to the employer. What we've seen in a few different examples is if more than one employee has made a report of a similar nature, you can group those refusals together. And we've seen that in a few different examples in the Prairies, where it made sense to lump up the concerns into one concern that could be looked at either not just in a workplace, but also regionally and also nationally to come up with a resolution plan. And just a reminder that the right to refuse is different than the comply and grievance process with the collective agreement disputes. If somebody, if there's a disagreement between the employee and the employer on conditions of employment under the collective agreement provisions, then you have to comply and then grieve it afterwards. The right to refuse is different, where you stop you're performing that dangerous work until you've come up with a solution that works for everybody involved. One of the key things that came up in our last webinar that I really wanted to reinforce, because I don't think everybody clearly heard every time that Marianne and myself were saying it, but if there's any action that is likely to affect others in the workplace, if a member wants to do that right to refuse, they should do that in consultation with the local and the component or the PSAC regional office for directly chartered locals. Saw a number of different concerns come up in different workplaces, such as call centers, those kinds of things where there was issues going on in different areas, that if the right to refuse is an option to be explored, it should be done along with the local and the component and their input and their opportunity to maybe address the issues at a national or regional level, assuming it's happening in a bunch of different workplaces. Again, any workplace issue that's likely to be occurring in similar workplaces can be done in consultation with those workplaces. So the best way to connect similar workplaces is probably through the component that represents each of those similar workplaces. For example, would be Service Canada offices. They represent, CEIU. The component represents a number of different workplaces, Service Canada offices throughout the Prairies. They've got the best understanding of the work that can be done and the issues that are being brought up in all those different locations. We can also learn from what other employers are doing to set processes and practices. Example would be a workplace has come up with a really good workaround to address an issue with exposures. That might be a learning experience for other workplaces to say, hey, this is working in one workplace. How do we make that work within our workplace? One of the things that came up in since our last discussion was if there's workplaces that have issues and they want to raise the right to refuse, my guess is that there's already ongoing discussions around that topic at probably a national level or at very least a regional level. All sorts of things going on and options being debated, those kinds of things at a national level that might affect individual workplaces. So it's another example of why somebody that wants to enact the right to refuse should consult the local and the component before making that decision. Because chances are, if it's happening in Edmonton or Calgary or Winnipeg, Regina, Saskatoon, wherever, then the likelihood of that affecting other workplaces is already pretty great. And hopefully the employer on a national level, if you're fall under a national employer, has already taken those into consideration. And then there's the different sections of the provincial legislations. One of the questions that was a hot topic leading up to the last webinar we had, and even afterwards, was the whole concept of critical or essential worker. My hope is that a lot of these issues have been addressed around teleworking, those kinds of things, but it's constantly evolving. Really good example of that, my wife works in healthcare. She was deemed critical. She had to go to work every day as an admin person. But then there was this decision on Friday that, absolutely her work is critical, but it's not critical for her to be in the workplace anymore. She can work from home. So there was measures to take into consideration working from home. So I'm hoping a lot of workplaces have already done that, but there also might be the opportunity to reevaluate that as circumstances change. So the whole concept of critical versus essential, managers are to consider on-site work only if the work meets the definition of critical service, and working remotely to support it is not feasible. Critical service is one that, if disrupted, would result in a high or very high degree of injury to the health, safety, security, or economic well-being of Canadians, or to the effective functioning of the Government of Canada. All departments are required to identify their respective critical services and related supporting resources. And then there's a reference to this, the policy on government security that ties into the whole concept of teleworking, those kinds of things. And then by contrast, the wording that was thrown out more frequently and more often with the word essential, because of the whole concept around collective bargaining. Essential service is used to determine which positions must continue to provide service during the strike activity. Essential service agreements are agreed to with the bargaining agents no current essential services agreements exist for the vast majority of public service organizations. The way I can kind of wrap up that concept between critical and essential as I see it is in this last bullet here. Critical work involves the concept of where and how the work is to be done on top of the concept of does it need to be done. So does it need to be done is more around the concept of essential, but the critical work is, does it need to be done in the workplace? Does it need to be, is there opportunities for teleworking? Those sorts of things. And again, it's constantly evolving. And I think a lot of workplaces have already, addressed their teleworking situations, but there also might be the opportunity to further identify what work is critical and how do you manage that work. The other concept here too is when we look at the essential services agreement under the collective bargaining process, there's also numbers of people attached to that that wouldn't apply to the critical work. An example would be, there's 10 people doing this work that's deemed essential, but only 5 people out of that 10 need to be doing that work. So then that's the concept of essential. That's not the concept of critical. So a little bit difference there. If people have questions about the concept of critical or for essential, those will pop up in the questions and we'll try to clarify that a little bit as well. So the next part I want to go into is connecting with our members. So obviously we don't have the face-to-face contact as much as we were used to. The new work realities have changed. So what I wanted to do is open up a section of our discussion towards reaching out, connecting to our members, and staying in touch with our members. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Caroline Klug, who is our Regional Education Officer, to give a bit of presentation so you don't have to listen to me continue talking. And then Caroline, you can let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this presentation and reaching out to members this evening. I sincerely hope that everyone is safe and well and that you and your families are keeping well as we go through this time of isolation. So important to reach out, connect, and stay in touch. And this is something that very much local executives can start to do if they haven't already had the opportunity to begin the process. Next slide, please. And just, yeah, thank you. So many members would appreciate a call from their local executive, their colleagues, in large part just to keep that, those connections. We all know that often at work, really good friendships are made, that work provides a lot of our social interaction, as it were. And so recognizing that, also recognizing it is as important for members to reach out to their local executive as it is for local executive to reach out to their members in these times. So if you're part of this webinar this evening and you are a member who isn't part of their local executive as of yet, please take the opportunity to reach out to your local executive. And if you don't know exactly how to connect with them, feel free to call the regional office. They'll be able to let you know which component you're with and how to get in touch. And in large part, part of the importance as well for a local executive to reach out to your members is that work expectations, as Clint has mentioned, are changing on a daily basis, with some having to go into work and some having their work sites adjusting to social distancing, while some work places are beginning to require working from home. So any manner of different situations are coming up. Next slide, please. So let your members know that you, as part of the local executive, that you're best placed to answer questions about the following. So, what is the health and safety situation of your workplace? And again, so important for local executives really to also make that connection in these days with the local health and safety committee. So, if you have opportunity as a local executive to conference call with the Health and Safety Committee at least once every 2 weeks, just to continually keep up to date in terms of what the situation is. Members are calling and asking if their shifts are changing. Again, local executive often well placed to answer those questions. What are the expectations of members who are asked to work from home? Are they expected to have equipment? Are they expected, to be able to log in and how to do that and so on? And again, for those working at home, have managers put into place resources and training. And in addition to that, how members will also want to know how they can help in these times. Next slide, please. This is the time to encourage members to reach out to their local executive. And in large part, this is very much about a two-way conversation. And, because members have the knowledge of day-to-day operations, points of contact with the general public, how the work site is entered, and how social distancing might be possible in a workplace in terms of, how desks might have to be rearranged, cubicles and whatnot for those who do have to go into work. Members also know what work can be done at home and what work would not be suitable. Just in regard to the previous point, there are locals that have multiple workplaces, and sometimes the local executive may not have as much knowledge about the smaller details of different work sites. And this is really where members have that key information. Members know what resources and training they will need to be able to work from home. And this is really the opportunity for members of the executive to really have those fulsome discussions about what members' work realities are like. Right now, many members are, can and possibly may have some time in which to really have a discussion about what their workplace realities are like. Next slide, please. Local executive and stewards, as are the backbone of the union presence in the workplace. And so reaching out to your membership, it's often very, very difficult. We certainly recognize that stewards and local executive, they take on quite the task, even just being members, who are stepping forward in terms of union work. And so this might be the opportunity to take the time to really build your membership list, as it were. Hopefully most local executive will have at least a starter of a list. And so if there are multiple work sites, break your membership list down by the work sites, determine who the stewards are, and then this is the opportunity to really connect with those members who are very social. In every workplace, there are invariably a few members who have that personality in which they're connected with all their colleagues. They know what's going on. They have that wonderful ability to talk to virtually everybody. So if you have a very large local, this is the opportune time really to bring them on board and ask them if they would participate and if they would help create a telephone tree. And then each day reach out to 5 or 10 members and confirm their personal home email contacts and really just start to make those connections. Next slide, please. It's also the opportunity to connect with all the manners of the social media. So Facebook, creating a local page, you know, Twitter, those short bursts of pertinent information, Instagram. I mean, this is the opportunity. I hear so much about people cooking like they've never cooked before while they're at home, baking like they've never baked while they're at home. So, you know, if your colleagues are out there, you know, ask them to put pictures and you know, and mention the local, right? And even pictures of the first sign of spring on daily walks. Email is one of those things that, you know, people really want to make sure that when emails are sent out, that it's with good information, that it isn't just sent out on a random basis. And this is the opportunity when you're talking to members just to say, yeah, you know, every now and then we will send you an email, and we will make sure that we send that out with pertinent information that's specific to, you know, our local needs, as it were. Encourage FaceTime, you know, with groups of members. You know, take the opportunity to do the 10:30 coffee thing, you know, and this is a way, again, of encouraging members to stay connected, and also for local executive to be able to answer questions, you know, and have those chats. WhatsApp, send information, chat by video and audio, it's free. And Zoom, which is a sort of a new opportunity for groups to chat. So, and often this is also a really fabulous time to really connect those people who have that ability to open up those different aspects of social media. So if you know somebody who has a cell phone glued to the palm of their hand, and they really know how to use Twitter, and they really know how to use Instagram, ask them if they would do that on behalf of the local executive. Next page, please. So when connecting with members, you know, you're reaching out, and you've reached out, and you're connecting with members. Take the opportunity, ask members how they're doing. You know, ask them what information they would like from their union. Ask members if they're aware of the information that's offered on the PSAC website. Ask what their priorities are. Let them know about the health and safety initiatives for their work sites, and let them know about what the union structure is and how it works. Let them know what PSAC is doing to protect their rights at work. And again, it's a two-way conversation. It's all about really connecting in a very authentic way, letting members know that you value their input. Next slide, please. So staying in touch. So, you know, reaching out, connecting, and then ultimately staying in touch. So there are different ways that it's important for both members and local executive to stay in touch. So again, as mentioned, encouraging both members, local executives, and health and safety to stay in touch and check on a daily basis PSAC and the PSAC Prairie websites for information and updates such as rights at work, help for members, how the government is supporting workers. Also very important, letting members know that on the PSAC website, there are mental health resources, and how to get the vote with COVID-19. Next slide, please. Yep. On
so Caroline,
PSAC Prairies,
Caroline,
you know, keeping up to date with the webinar offering.
Caroline, it's Clint.
Yeah.
Can we go over that last little bit of the slide? I'm assuming it was the same for other people that was for me. We were getting like a feedback kind of thing around what you were trying to say, so we lost you for about 10 seconds there. So So the one you left off what was the rights at work.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So can you hear me? Oh, okay. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, it was just a little electronic glitchy kind of thing that we were hearing, so.
Oh, okay. So yeah, just very important to keep in touch with the PSAC and PSAC Prairies websites. There's some wonderful, wonderful information both for local executives, but also for members, and really encouraging members to take advantage and take the opportunity to look at aspects such as the mental health resources and getting support to cope with COVID-19, you know, and aspects such as how the government is supporting workers. Next slide, please. And on the Prairies, the PSAC, on the PSAC Prairies website, you know, really pertinent information such as the health and safety, free access to the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety publications. And as such opportunities become available, that can be found on the PSAC Prairies website, as well as the upcoming webinars. And next. And so, again, just to reach out, members, reach out to your local executive, local executives, reach out to your members, connect, and stay in touch. No one person can realistically predict how long work sites will be closed. And unfortunately, this uncertainty can provoke a lot of anxiety. Take care of each other by reaching out, connecting, and staying in touch. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. So there's a few different websites that I would like to provide for further information. First one is the PSAC Prairies website. On this site, you'll find the presentation from the first webinar we did, as well as the recording, and all sorts of other information related to the COVID pandemic that we've been dealing with. PSAC nationally has also got really good up-to-date information on in discussions they've had with employer on a number of different topics, such as the critical and essential worker, those kinds of things. I have to say that for years, when members would call me, I wouldn't refer to them to the PSAC national site because the information around health and safety wasn't very good, wasn't up to date, and wasn't reliable. I can confidently say now that I'm thoroughly impressed with all the information coming out around the COVID-19 pandemic on the national website. Lots of information going out that I feel confident sharing. The last website there on the slide is the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. Fabulous organization that's actually PSAC members, provide all sorts of training opportunities, pamphlets, posters, information sheets, one-pagers, that kind of thing, and most of it is free of charge. They also, the information that they provide can reference both provincial and federal legislation, so they look after both legislations. One of the best things that they've done just recently is released a whole bunch of courses that they had available online, and they've released those free of charge to anybody that wants them. So there were some courses that were like $80 to $100 per person. They're now free. Some of the training is on like pandemic preparedness, lots of training on mental health, similar to what Caroline was mentioning around, you know, distancing and isolation and teleworking, all those kinds of issues. It can affect people's mental health. So all sorts of training and awareness and information around mental health issues around the pandemic as well. I think there's a total of about 15 or 16 online courses that used to be a charge to them that are now free. So absolutely fabulous organization. If you're a committee member or a representative that's looking for training opportunities, that's the first place I would look for training opportunities that are free of charge at no cost to the employer or the individual to take on. Some other sources of information. I am constantly myself referring to the provincial health authorities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba for the most up-to-date information that's provided. So they're providing direction and recommendations to the public and to workplaces, those kinds of things. That's my first stop that I'm looking for. If I'm looking for guidance on what what's being recommended by the provincial health authorities. There's also the Health Canada. The provincial health authorities will often reference Health Canada and their recommendations. Health Canada also takes recommendations from the World Health Organization around travel, those kinds of things. Again, an excellent source of information, the most up-to-date information, accurate information that you can trust on what's going on and what you need to do. And then the other 2 points there that I included at the end there that I included in the original webinar around the references to the federal Canada Labour Code and the provincial regulations and acts as well. And then if you need more information on the right to refuse for whatever reason, maybe you're a local executive and you've got your members coming forward to you saying, I need to enact my right to refuse. What does it mean? What do we do? That resource there is really good, walking through the process, providing a flow chart of the process if that's what locals and workplaces need to do to resolve issues. So before we get to the question and answers, there's a couple things I want to make note of. First one is, one of the most common questions I get asked is, what do I need to let the employer know around the virus? So examples would be, if I test positive, do I need to let the employer know? If somebody I'm living with tests positive, what do I need to let the employer know? If somebody's under presumption and is under quarantine that I'm living with, what's the employer responsibility to ask and to know? So we recently got clarification from our legal staff on that. And the determination was that the employer does have the right to know if you or somebody that you live with tests positive for the COVID virus. And the rationale for that is that would affect the workplace and affect the employer's responsibility and the employer's obligation to protect everybody else that might be exposed in the workplace. So the information should be limited as to what the employer needs to know, but the legal opinion that we got in general terms would be that the employee has a responsibility to let the employer know if they've tested positive or somebody that they live with tests positive. Some other issues you might need to address on a case-by-case basis, but that's the general guidance we've received on that.